Hello, hello, beautiful listeners. Let's do this, shall we? Today, we talk about capacity. And this is in part because as I was preparing for today's episode, I was needing to ground myself in how to move through an intense season of life and work. And I wonder if some of you can relate. So, some of the things that are on my own plate that have left me feeling like my capacity is challenged are things like many of you are likely have been or are going through a reevaluation of what returning to work looks like. Now, I am not returning to a new office. I'm happy to report that at Point Road Studios, here is my in my own home studio. I'm staying put. So my I don't have a new place to go back to. However, I so many of my clients, the founders, the organizations, the leaders that I serve are coming back together in new and different ways. And that is giving me great opportunities to come back and meet them in person. So I have a lot of events coming up in the coming weeks and months, largely focused on vision and strategy. So, are we holding the purpose of where we're going and then building and moving with the strategy of how to get there? And then, of course, underpinning all of that is teamwork. So, how do we work effectively, optimizing individual talents in an alchemy that works for the collective whole? So I'm in all of that work, which is lovely and fun and intense and means new routines for my home life, for my work life, for my creative life. So I have that going on. And for the parents out there, you too may be observing the changing of activities from the winter into spring. So we've got travel soccer has started and community soccer, T-ball's kicking off, and there's an performance for my daughter's acting program. So all kinds of things happening where it's different in kind schedules and new routines as a family. For everything from when do we do our shopping to who prepares dinner on what night to how are we dividing and conquering as a couple and thinking about where we're parenting and who shows up when. So that's different. Uh, I've also got gardening. When I think about my creative life, gardening is something that feeds my heart and soul. And it's spring is a time of seed sowing and yard clearing. And because we are on an expansive 5-acre property that's undergone construction, there's also bed building and real structural landscaping elements to dreaming up what my heart is calling into being. And so that takes attention and time. And then, of course, there's the things that you don't expect, but I can tell you we ought to expect because there's always life coming at us and things that we haven't anticipated that happen. And so there's been some less fun and sexy projects that I'm needing to take on for home maintenance and figuring out how to tackle those things. And because the things showing up are outside of my area of expertise, in order to determine what the approach is, I'm having to really get clear on what the issues are. And there's learning and stretching for me. And of course, yes, delegating and bringing in the experts, but you've got to know what kind of expert do you need in the first place. So there's been a lot of time and attention on unexpected home projects, as happens when you live on a 5-acre property where you've got the beauty and the benefit of having two very old structures that are smaller outbuildings on the property, but they are also standalone buildings that need love and attention, as it turns out. And the list goes on. I'm officiating my first wedding. I'm helping my parents go through the final details of realizing their own home renovation. All of these are things that my heart is so happy and delighted to do. Like this is part of who I am and what I love to call in. And you will have your own mix of what you love to do and what you feel called to bring into being and to gift your attention to, all of which puts demands on our capacity. So that brings us back to today's topic. And in today's episode, there's really two moves that I want to make as we look at assessing capacity. First, I want to create a set of distinctions with you because, as you hear me say, my regular drumbeat, we can't change what we don't see. And so, if we sit first and return to and come back to again and again our awareness of the situation, then we can really determine how to move. New choices become available to us. We can really see with fresh eyes. And so I want to bring in some definitions and distinctions to help you see with fresh eyes your own capacity. So we'll look at that first. And then I will prompt you with some reflection questions to ask you to consider, get you thinking about, yeah, what is my own capacity right now? Today's episode is not about how do I grow my capacity and move into it, which I must admit, that was my initial topic because I am drawn as a human being to action. And then I reminded myself, as I will remind all of you, before we move to action and say, well, how do I build and grow and expand my capacity? We've got to sit with what is my capacity right now? So that's what we're going to do. And in case you're like, but I want to know about how to build and expand and grow my capacity, that's next week's episode. So you can tune in for that later this month. Okay, so let's go first to our set of distinctions. So let's start with capacity and create a shared definition there. And then I'm going to bring in 4 other pieces that I want us to notice. So, first, in terms of what do we mean by capacity? Here are the 2 common definitions that I think really get at the heart of what I'm talking about with capacity. The first is the maximum amount that something can contain. This this definition really speaks to me because when I consider my own capacity, I'm often asking myself, what am I holding? How much can I hold at once? And that can feel lovely and expansive, like my arms are thrown out and I'm grasping onto so much. And shadow side, when what I'm holding feels overwhelming or too heavy, suddenly I can feel like I'm bearing a weight that I can barely lift over and I'm afraid I'm going to get crushed by it. So, this definition of the maximum amount that something can contain speaks to this human being. The other definition, which is interconnected, is the amount that something can produce, right? So for the doers among us, I bet this will speak to you as well. In its whole, what we're really getting at here is what what is out there that you can hold or do. What's the maximum amount? What is your capacity? So that's the definition or definitions I wanted to prompt you with so we can start to think about, so what's the zone we're in as we're thinking about, okay, what is my capacity? How would I assess my capacity right now? And now I want us to look at 4 different points of view that we can take as we look at capacity. The first 2 I am talking about frequently when I'm doing leadership and executive coaching. So, working with professionals, and oftentimes the challenge they're faced with is, how can I do more right now? There's so many things coming at me and I need to be able to do it. And so, we're looking first and frequently at scale. How do I scale my impact? How do I scale my capacity? And scale can take on many different definitions. In fact, you could go into the deep dive I did on, like, oh wow, scale sits in, we're scaling fish. It's the scales that measure and weigh things, or scale. There's many different associations with scale. In business, when we talk about scaling, we're talking about increasing revenue at a faster rate than costs, which really comes down to the definition I want to use to scale, which is doing more with less. And that more may be producing actions, that more may be producing revenue, producing impact. But the idea is you're able to do more with less. That, if I intersect scale with capacity, right, The idea with scale is I may have expanded to the full of my capacity. I'm holding the maximum amount that I can hold. If we're scaling, we can produce higher outcomes even though what we're holding is the same. So we're not increasing our capacity. We're not embodying a new bucket size, but that we are actually able to do more holding the same capacity, right? Scaling, doing more with less. The other thing that I'm often talking about with my coaching clients is capability. So, I am often looking at capability because capability, or the power or ability to do something, that's how I would define capability. When we increase our capabilities, when we learn a new skill, we can increase our capacity. So for example, if I learn how to if I learn a new capability on creating PowerPoints, and I don't have to delegate small tasks to the designer I partner with on PowerPoints, I have increased my capability when it comes to PowerPoint generation such that my capacity has increased. And this list can go on. So thinking about what are these skills or abilities that I need, right? The capabilities that will allow me to do something. And when I'm able to do more, it can increase my capacity. And again, still we get to a point where we're holding as much as we can possibly hold. And then we have to determine, what am I delegating? What am I letting go of? What am I choosing to do myself? But when we increase our capabilities, it gives us more choices and allows us to scale and grow our capacity. So, capability and scale, you can see how those intersect in with capacity. And these are the baseline things I like to look at to kind of assess, how am I doing? What are the capabilities I lean on? Do I have any blind spots? What am I really trying to do? And so, therefore, if I think about wanting to scale, for the sake of what? How am I thinking about my capacity? And yet, the two things I'm going to talk about next are what really help us optimize our capacity, figure out what capabilities to be paying attention to consider, for the sake of what are we growing into what scale? How are we scaling? What are we trying to do more of with less? And those two things are attention and discernment. And I'm going to take those in turn. Attention is about what we choose to notice. So when we think about capacity, when we think about capability, when we think about scale, what are we paying attention to as we look at those things? Because you can optimize all day long. You can learn new skills all day long. You can learn how to hold more and more. You can learn how to produce more with less. And this is where I want to bring it into the design yourself perspective. But for the sake of what? Are you actually doing more aligned with what matters to you? Or just in some wild efficiency game? And hey, if that is what lights you up, great. Then maybe doing figuring out what the efficiency game is also designing yourself. For many of us, it's not. For many of us, we can get caught in a rat race of trying to do more and more and more and more without checking it with, is this what I want to gift my attention to? And I recorded a whole podcast episode about gifting our attention, which I'll drop in the show notes, in case you want to go back to it. But that's why attention matters. Discernment, or the ability to judge well, discernment is so if we think about, here's what I'm paying attention to, here's what I'm seeing about scaling and capabilities and how it intersects with my capacity. Discernment is what lets us see, okay, so therefore, what am I choosing to do or not do? What am I choosing to hold or let go of? Discernment draws on our wisdom, brings us back into alignment with designing ourselves, and takes us out of a mindless, not intentional capacity game. So that's what I wanted you to think about. Your capacity, the maximum amount that you can contain or hold, the maximum amount that you can produce, and holding and learning distinctions around capability, scale, attention, discernment. Okay, before we go, let's talk about some questions I want you to think about as you consider assessing your own capacity. So, the first thing I want you to consider is, do you have space to take on more right now? How much more? What's your capacity to take on more? And what I want to notice without judgment in myself is that I am often holding so much that when something quote unquote unexpected, when something not on my plan shows up, which, dear listeners, it always does, I'm always finding myself then sacrificing something. Usually it's my workouts or eating well or relaxing, which I'm kind of chuckling as I say, because I'm like, relaxing, that's not my go-to mode of being, but I know it helps. Those are the things that fall off my radar when these unexpected, though should be expected, things show up. So I want you to think about your capacity to take on more right now. And notice it without judgment, just like me. Like that's just a baseline question to see, what would happen if the unexpected showed up? And then of course you can think about it and to what degree. Because sometimes it's a small thing that shows up. Like for me, a school closure. And so that's might be a single day or a couple of days. How much does that throw me? Well, what about if there's an unexpected crisis? What about if a loved one gets really sick? What about if I'm struck with grief? What about if I'm offered a huge opportunity to do amazing work that's going to be really intense and take up ask me to be away for 3 weeks in the next 3 months? What's my capacity for that? So, do you have space to take on more right now? Questions 2 and 3 really come at, and is what you're paying attention to what you want to? Is it the thing that matters most as you think about designing yourself? Question 2 is, what demands your attention? These are those things that we have to react to. Oftentimes unexpected, though sometimes not. It might be the routines that demand your attention, the partners, the friends, the family that demands your attention, the clients that demand your attention, the health issues that demand your attention. What demands your attention? Question 3, what deserves your attention? And you might quiet all the demands. That's why we start there. Okay, like, okay, I see you demands. Now you just stay over there for a moment and let me cozy up to, but what deserves my attention? Maybe your lists are identical. Maybe you notice that there's some differences between them, but what deserves your attention? Question 4, how would you grade your ability to focus on what matters most? How would you grade your ability to focus on what matters most? Notice this without judgment. This is just for you to assess, how am I doing? What is my capacity? And how am I using that capacity? Question 5. What gets in the way of optimizing your capacity? What gets in the way? Again, cozying up to it. There's no judgment, just checking in, letting the question wash over you. All these questions are in the show notes. You can come back and write them out later. But as you're listening, I just want you to take it in. Does perfectionism get in the way of optimizing your capacity? What's the role that fear plays? What habits are you in that might be serving you or not? What gets in the way of optimizing your capacity? Despite your best intentions, despite being amazing, what gets in the way? And finally, question 6. What's your capacity superpower? What is your capacity superpower? For myself, I am blown away and I just want to stand and own my own value. I can hold a lot. I can hold a lot. And what gets in the way? Not setting boundaries around that. What gets in the way? Uh, Not writing down different pieces. So then I spend a lot of mental energy coming back to what are all those pieces when more and more is coming at me? Right. What's your capacity superpower? Own that, stand in the value of it. And what gets in the way? They often intersect. A strength overused has a shadow side. So just notice that without judgment. What's your capacity superpower? And that, dear, beautiful listeners, is what I wanted to share with you all today. I hope that you are leaving. I trust that you are leaving with a greater awareness about your own capacity, with some new distinctions, ways of seeing your capacity. And for this week, let that be enough. Maybe you move forward with a noticing practice to notice without judgment. How am I assessing my capacity throughout this week? And next week, we'll come back and we'll talk together about how you build and grow your capacity, which you can do. And I know that you will. And I'm sure you probably already have and are. And doesn't mean you can't do it more. Okay. If you love today's episode, share it with a friend. Let someone know who maybe you see someone who is out there doing so much and you want to just tap them on the shoulder and say, I see you. I support you. You're doing a lot. And take a listen. What do you notice about your capacity? So share it on, pass it on. And if you are hearing today's episode and thinking, oh my gosh, my team needs help on how we grow our capacity, or hey, you talked about those sessions you're doing where you're helping set strategy and figure out how we work as a team to get there, and you need some help on that, let's talk. If you need that for yourself, you're thinking, yeah, I could really benefit from some coaching support to help me be savvier there. Go over to pointroadstudios.com, the contact page, it will come directly to me, and I will be delighted to hear from you and talk about what we might mix up together to create some support for you, your team, your organization. All right. And that, dear listeners, is all for today. Until next Wednesday, please know that I am cheering you on and holding my deeply held belief that there is nothing stopping you. So go on ahead and get after whatever it is that you really want.